everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How is everyone doing? I'm laughing with glee because I started, you won't hear this, but I started doing the introduction to Couples Therapy, the other podcast I do with my wife, and didn't like saying that. My wife, M''wife, don't like that. Felt bad with Naomi. Instead of the intro for this podcast, which is Beginnings, Couples Therapy, we handle relationships and therapy. This one, armchair Freudian talks and whatever I remember from the days when I was a philosophy professor. And that's how you tell the difference between the two shows. Anyway, how are you doing? I know the world's crumbling, but I just deleted 2,500 emails, old emails, a lot of them Lyft receipts from my Gmail account, which was threatening to, I don't know what happens when you get to 100% of the space you've used up, but it was threatening to get there. So hopefully I've bought myself a little time, so I'm feeling not bad for once. And folks, you know what else makes me feel not only not bad, but great? Today's episode with Lia Kohl. If you don't know who Lia is, I'm going to read you her bio right now. Growing up in the Bay Area, cellist and composer Lia Kohl began playing the cello when she was 8 years old and is trained as a classical musician. However, after moving to Chicago in the early 20-teens, she began improvising and making her own music. Her first full album, Too Small to Be a Plane, was released in 2022 on Shinkoio, which was followed by The Ceiling Reposes in 2023 on American Dreams Records, and her latest, Normal Sounds, is out now on Moonglyph Records, and it is wonderful. I really like The Ceiling Reposes. I absolutely love Normal Sounds. And Lia herself is a dream. This is such a delightful conversation. She is a delightful human being. I promise I will come up with a different adjective. But when I'm talking about Lia, it is the best one. Delightful. It's philosophical. This is biographical. She's a thoughtful person, and she's an open person, and it's just a delight talking to her. I said I would come up with a different one. I lied, folks. The first one I reach for when I'm just talking off the top of my head. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this episode. Go buy Lia's albums on Bandcamp. Or, I guess, physically? I don't know. I haven't bought a physical album in forever. But I do buy them on Bandcamp. You gotta buy them. Guys, folks, people, give some money to artists. Artists like the ones I have coming up on the show. Yes, stay tuned. Stay tuned. Angry Black Men coming up. Kishi Bashi. Los Bichos. Oh, this was great. Rose Melberg from the Softies. That was a brilliant conversation. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Lia. I was doing research on you.
Yes.
And now I'm only half a sentence in, but there felt like there was something in that yes. And I'm curious when you heard I was doing research on you.
Oh, I think it's just funny to be online, you know? Like it's funny to have that it's possible for someone to do research on me is funny to me.
Do you even think it's
not
funny?
Not in a bad way, but just
sure.
In like a.
But you are a public figure, right?
Yeah. See, public figure is not how I identify, but like it's true. Like you can Google me and find out some things about my life. I'm not like I don't mean to be like I'm super private or something.
No.
But it's funny. That's what the yes was, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But no, this is where I find this interesting because when like there's one thing, right? You make some kind of pact. If you do what I do, if you work in showbiz, in Tinseltown, right? There's some sort of pact you make where you're like, all right, there is some portion of my life that I sacrifice now to the public, right? This is the point of what I do in some way. There's some part of me, and my wife and I do. My wife's a stand-up, and she's an actor. And
stand-up is a whole new level. Yeah,
I mean that is right because she has to make even more choices about the demarcation line she will make, especially on stage or like in a special that's going to go out to whatever millions of people, right? You have to make this demarcating line. And for us, we're like, all right, well, this part of our relationship we're not going to talk about in public just so it can be us, and this we will. And right now, you as a musician, and especially a musician who works more like closer to the avant-garde edge, right? Mm-hmm. That's not so much a part of the pact you're making when you make art, is it?
Totally. Yeah. I'm not writing lyrics. I'm not writing poetry. I'm not, my music is quite abstract. So the part of myself that I'm giving, so to speak, to the public is more ethereal, which might be like closer to my soul or something, but it's not, I'm not telling people about my marriage,
Well, yes. Well,
I am, but it's quite veiled.
This is interesting because when I write lyrics, not so much like I started writing music again. I was in a band for late 90s, early 2000s. And I was very repressed then. So all the lyrics I wrote were beyond cryptic. Like they would make Steve Malkmus look like Hemingway. Like it was just like that level of just basically like you're picking words out of a word search. I mean, not really. Like there was something, but there was something behind them is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm in the same way, I assume, when I listen to your music, right? It feels like there's something there, right? More underneath.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about honesty in art. Like, what does that mean? What does it mean to make something that really comes from you? And how can you be aware of the forces that are sort of around you and in you, telling you to make something slightly different? And I do think that there's something wonderful about trying to find the most honest thing you can say, even if it's really abstract. And then, of course, what is honesty in the context of being like, well, I'm not lying. I couldn't possibly lie by making weird sounds.
Right. Okay, but this is where this is. Yeah, you could, because it could be like, well, I know this is, this is where I think there's a lot of interesting stuff. Like you could say like, well, this sounds like this other thing that got this grant, or this sounds like, there's a not to get all fallen out of the coconut tree, but there's a context we all exist in, right? And you could think about music in terms like, all right, look, I don't want to write Ariana Grande songs, but I do know that this is something like the Kronos Quartet would do, and so I'm going to do it like that. And it doesn't come from an honest place. It just comes from this is the area of music that feels right to me. See, this again, I'm like saying this, but then I'm also like wavering at the same time because I'm like, well, there is something in avant-garde music. Well, okay, let me ask you this because I really want to go into I more about what you were saying about honesty. I'm saying this, and I'm backtracking as I say it because I want to believe that if you choose to perform a kind of music that isn't popular, you're doing it because it speaks to you in a deeper way. And I'm curious, is that true for you?
Yes, absolutely. And I think when I'm talking about honesty, I'm thinking about the conversation between me and the audience. And sometimes that audience is, the internet at large who likes experimental music. And sometimes that audience is literally the people who are in front of me while I'm on a stage. And, I'm in these contexts sometimes where I'm, for example, opening for a rock band, and everyone is there to hear the rock band. And they're like, who is this weirdo opening for my music that I like? And honesty is acknowledging that scenario, or acknowledging that situation, and also trying to still be me. Because you can't not acknowledge the conversation that you're having with the world that you're in and the audience that you have, but you also can't cater to that too much because that's I think, dishonest to yourself then.
If you're pandering.
If you're pandering, yeah. It's funny to talk about pandering in the context of avant-garde music, but it is totally possible.
Yeah.
It's totally possible to be like, should I make something more pretty? Should I make something less pretty? Are people going to judge me for like, not only making noise? Or are people going to hate the fact that this isn't tonally beautiful?
How do you personally walk that line or figure it out?
Well, I think I want both of those things in music. I'm interested in both of those things. I also just like the sound of the world, which is not always pretty. So I think walking that line is about finding what's actually interesting to me and not imagining what might be interesting to someone else. Mm-hmm. I'm a very responsive person, a very empathetic person, and those are good qualities and also can be a crutch because I'm always responding to what I
yes.
Because what I get from the energy and what I imagine I'm getting from the energy in the room,
Yeah, it can very much lead into some kind of aesthetic codependence, right?
Yes, exactly. Which also is good. It's good to be dependent on the people around you. Like, we are an ecosystem.
Right. And until it comes to like, oh, what do you guys need? What can I feed you, as opposed to
what can I provide you? Yeah.
What's coming out of whatever's inside me or what I'm feeling. But this is the thing, and I created this metaphor, and I don't know if it works, but like when I said that when I was writing cryptic lyrics, it's because I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want a direct connection with it. Was too embarrassing to have emotions. It was too embarrassing to express those emotions. And I'm wondering if that's a similar thing for you, where you're like, well, I can play this music and it expresses something inside of me, but there's this nonverbal layer now. And so if someone wants to know exactly what I'm feeling, they have to guess at it. And so there is a little bit of obfuscation, or there can be. And I'm wondering if that's true, if I'm just putting that on you, if that is something you've thought about.
That's interesting to think about. I don't feel like I'm obfuscating things. I'm not particularly interested in lyrics.
Yeah. I don't think you are either, by the way.
Yeah.
Just so we're clear. I don't get that from you. But I'm just curious. Like when someone decides to like, well, this is, I'm going to express myself in this way. Mm-hmm. Right. And it does feel honest coming from you. I'm curious if that impulse comes from well, I still want there to be some layer between me and the audience where it's too painful to totally express like what's in me, or if it comes from well, no, this really is a connection to me and it's just nonverbal.
I think it's more the latter, but I think I also want to question the idea that art is always about expressing yourself.
Oh, trust me, there's a number of guests have pushed back on me that, and I agree with you.
Or not. When I say expressing myself, I mean like expressing my emotions or expressing my experience or expressing my relationships, but rather expressing my experience of being alive. I think a lot of my music is about that, and it's very specific to me because I can't get out of being myself.
Right. The Cartesian trap.
So, and a lot of the music is very intuitive, for example. It's not choices that I could necessarily explain to you, but they are about sort of reaching outward toward the world and then expressing what that feels like to other people. And I think the most meaningful interactions I have with anyone who listens to my music is like, oh, I relate to the way that you're relating to the world. So rather than someone, I'm gonna give you a sort of spatialization of this. Rather than me facing someone and telling them something about myself, I'm asking them to stand next to me so that we can both listen together. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So then when I just play like the keyboard behind me, the Acetone organ, right? When I'm just playing that and I'm thinking about interesting sounds or an interesting riff or something like that. When you go into creating a piece of music, do you have some kind of existential intention set? Like this is this is something like I want to express some experience or whatever? Or is it, again, I get binaries, it could be something totally else, but, or is it that you are just doing the same thing where you are looking for an interesting sound and then later on you intellectualize it?
I think it's a combination. I often set up situations for myself where I'm already responding to something. So like in this album that's coming out, I took a bunch of field recordings of, you know, sounds out in the world. Or in the album before that, I recorded the radio. So when I'm sitting down at the keyboard, I already have something that I'm responding to or mimicking or harmonizing, which is, it's an interesting thing to point out in the context of this conversation about like music being a conversation. I'm setting up these situations so that I'm already responding rather than kind of just sitting down at an instrument and just composing. Like that idea is actually really terrifying to me. Or I'm responding to, say, the physicality of the cello.
Oh, yeah.
Like there are things that I'm setting up for myself to be responsive. So I'm looking for interesting sounds, yes, but I already have something that I'm working with.
Oh, that's really interesting. So in a way, it's almost like you're in conversation. As a parenthetical, when I used to be a philosophy professor, the whole thing, and the thing that annoyed me about it about academia was that you were supposed to just pick a thing you want to write about and just find the last person who wrote about that thing, and then you respond to them. And I'm like, and the people that in the line, like I was supposed to be doing this very dry kind of philosophy, and the people in the whole line of this argument, whatever it was, like I remember the end of it was me having to like write a paper on Aristotle's metaphysics on this like very small thing that's in Metaphysics Zeta, and the discussion was so fucking boring and pointless, and I was like, I don't think this is worth putting any part of my life into it. And I'm like, but Heidegger did these Aristotle lectures, and they're like, well, he's not part of the conversation. I go, what do you mean? He wrote these lectures on Aristotle, on the thing that I'm supposed to be talking about, and it's much more interesting and vital. And they're like, well, no, this is the conversation. Okay. And I hated that. That's this. And I think that leaked into the rest of my life where I'm like, well, in some way I'm trying to like create something out of whole cloth, which is not real. End of parentheses. Because what you're saying is in some way that like it's this non-verbal thing. Because I'm stuck in this intellectual world in my head, everything's verbal in some way. And then you're saying like, well, no, there's just the sound, there's the radio, there's these field recordings, whatever. And I'm in conversation with that, the experience of being in the sound, and now I'm responding to it. Yeah. Which seems like a cellular conversation, something that like, do you know what I mean? Like totally. That kind of like deep sounds so shitty as a word to say, but I guess I'll just say it and be embarrassed that I can't think of it better.
No, deep is fine.
You're so deep.
The thing is, I mean, I like the word what's the word I want to use? I like the word resonance.
Yes.
Because it also is a physical thing. And I think the thing that I'm looking for is like a resonance between the music that I'm making, which is very much music, and the sound that's in the world, which is not something I can control.
Okay. Then I have to ask this then. Have you always been attuned to the world like this? Like even going back to childhood, was this always a way that you interacted with the people around you, with the experiences around you?
Yes, actually, I think so. I find the world to be very overwhelming. Mm-hmm. I don't drive, for example, because it's like the opposite of being bad at multitasking. Like I can't shut off the things that I need to shut off in order to like pay attention to the road. So like if I drove, I would just like veer off the road because I saw something that surprised me, and I would die. And that's, I'm not trying to do that quite yet.
Right.
So I feel like my relationship to the world is it's very much of one of being overwhelmed. Yeah. And that can manifest in a practice of trying to organize that into art making.
So then when you were a kid, did you get pats on the head for being like this? Did you get told you're too sensitive? Like, what was the response to you having this kind of just like, because to me, this is where I sometimes like to start with is like, this is just your basic experience of the world, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're a kid, right? How you develop that sense very much is dependent on the feedback you're getting from people around you, from the world around you. So what was that like?
Totally. I am incredibly grateful to have a parent who took very good care of my sensitivity and encouraged that. I think my mom's also a very sensitive person and also an artist. So I think she never made me feel like that was a weird thing, but more like that was normal and good. And that manifests in all kinds of things. Like, she was always really strong about listening to your intuition, both for things that are artistic and things for, like, I would take the city bus to school every day, and she would be like, if you feel unsafe, like, listen to that, because that's telling you something. Which maybe seems like a weird thing to bring into this artistic conversation, but I think it's the same thing. Actually, it's like, what is your sense of people? Like, she was really, she took really good care of me as the person that I am.
So where else are you getting the positive feedback from? Or is it just your mom?
I also went to Waldorf school. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a kind of alternative schooling practice that is very creatively focused.
More so than Montessori school?
More so than Montessori school, I would say. Yeah. We did a lot of art. We did a lot of like learning poetry by heart and, I don't know, singing songs. It's good for a lot of things. It's also, it doesn't necessarily foster math and science kind of focused learning. But I think it was really good for me and the way that I am emotionally. So I definitely got positive feedback from that early schooling. I also don't mean to say that I just like grew up in a bubble. Like, I grew up in the city, and
sure,
kids are mean. And
how did you respond to when they were mean? Right? Is it I'm going to cry? Is it, do you cry? Do you fight back? Do you, because this is where, the minute you start to get something, for me, like when I was sensitive, and then I say this a lot, so I'll just be very quick about it, but like my body deadened, right?
Yeah.
Once I started to get pushback from other people, instead of like, I don't think I really had much of a kind of protective bubble, and I had to like rebuild that bubble later in life.
I think that my skin got thicker. I think it's important to have experiences of people being assholes, because, some people are assholes. And, I'm mentioning my mom and how good she was at taking care of her sensitive child, but she's also an incredibly strong person. So I think she modeled not taking any shit pretty well. She's a single mom, and she had a career and did the whole thing. And I think like seeing her model that was also really helpful, But yeah, I also don't want to paint it like everything was just fine and dandy for me the whole time or something.
Sure. But I am trying to figure out, like, I think the protective bubble, and you can tell me if this is correct or not, but your mom and the Waldorf school kind of gave you at least the space where you didn't just turn it off because some bully at the park was just like, look at this kid with a cello or whatever.
Yeah. I think that if you have a certain amount of safety and love, that helps you deal with the part of life that isn't safety and love.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also moved around a lot as a kid. I grew up, we lived in New York with the exception of 1 year in Los Angeles until I was 7. And then we moved to San Francisco, and I homeschooled for a couple of years.
Oh.
And then I moved to Indiana for college, moved to Berlin, and that, now we're getting into adulthood, but I got really used to making new friends and being the new kid, which I think is also, it doesn't have to do with people being mean, but it just has to do with like, you have to kind of fend for yourself in those situations as a kid. And I got pretty comfortable with that.
Are your parents native New Yorkers?
They're both native Californians, but they both lived in New York when I was born. And my dad still lives in New York.
Interesting. What brought them to New York?
They're both musicians.
Right.
My dad is a bass player, and my mom is a singer and a songwriter.
Okay. And in what context? I mean, I think you're younger than me, so when did they move? Like, in my mind, when you said singer-songwriter, I'm like, my first thought was like, oh, yeah, she moved to be part of the Greenwich Village scene. And then I'm like, wait, you're too young for your mom to be part of that.
Let's see, my mom moved in the early 80s. I think my dad moved in the 70s.
So are they part of are they like part of the like quote unquote legitimate art scene, the New York downtown art scene? Like where are they?
Yeah, so my dad is a jazz bass player, and I think the scene that they shared is one of sort of new jazz, downtown new jazz stuff. My dad plays a lot of fusion, a lot of Brazilian music now. He was just on tour with Mike Stern in Japan.
Okay.
So that's kind of the scene that they were in together, and yeah.
Okay, so grimy New York. Are they both from the Bay Area?
They're both from the Bay Area, yeah.
Okay, so separately, they go to New York, part of the downtown art scene, they meet there.
Yeah.
Okay, and then they have you.
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming, well, what brought them to Los Angeles?
So my mom and I moved to Los Angeles when I was 2 and 3 to live with my grandparents for a little stint.
Okay, so you don't really remember.
And when I say Los Angeles, since you're there, I will say, no, it wasn't Los Angeles, it was Orange County. And not the sexy part.
Okay. Okay, so they go to the super conservative OC.
Yes.
And so, okay, but you're too young. Like, at what point do you start to kind of, I'm guessing your parents separated around that point? Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't really even know them together as a couple?
No.
Okay. So
although they're on very good terms.
Okay. Yeah, but when you really start being conscious of yourself as a person, like they're already kind of, I guess, divorced at that point?
Yeah, they're separate.
Okay. And then, but she's back in New York, so you see them, both of them?
Yes. But I grew up with my mom. Live with my mom.
Was your dad in the picture? Like, did you hang out with him? Did he just like when he was back from?
Yeah, he was around.
Tour, you would see him like was he responsible? Like, because I'm trying to figure out like you grew up with your mom makes me think that perhaps he was not the responsible parent, and that's why you ended up with.
He was not the parent who raised me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So he's off on tour. He's hanging out with John Zorn or whatever, and there. So then what brought your mom to San Francisco?
A number of things. I think that she thought that was a better place to raise a kid. But yeah, I think also just New York wasn't doing it for her anymore.
Sure. I mean, this is what post Giuliani. It's all cleaned up M&M stores.
This was 1994.
Yeah, okay. So it's beginning to get kind of
95.
Sanitized.
Yeah.
It's no longer kind of the cool New York.
Yeah.
The New York.
Yeah, she was like, too clean, got to get my kid out.
I don't want my kid hanging out with some Times Square Elmo. We gotta go where the beat poets live.
Bring back the prostitutes. Sorry, sex workers.
So you really.
And then, so then we lived in San Francisco for into high school.
Yeah. So you really like became a person in San Francisco. Like that's really what is.
Yes.
What is the geography that is contributing to you as a human being.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Although I do have memories my earliest memories are from Orange County. I do have a lot of memories from being in New York. So I think New York still feels like home when I go there. I start walking faster and I don't know, something happens to me. I'm going there tomorrow, so I'm really thinking about it a lot.
Yeah.
But
we never lose that.
I definitely am a New Yorker also.
Yeah. My wife's from New York, and I lived there for a long time before we moved out here, and we still walk fast and are annoyed by everyone on the sidewalk here in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
It's
my spouse is from Minnesota, and which is the opposite of being from New York. And it's a funny dynamic because like I'm the person who gets rid of spiders. I'm the person who like asks for directions or like will tell someone what I think about it, what they're doing. Nick will be like, "Can you go and Can you go and be New York for a minute in this situation?
So you've still got that in you. Is your
Yeah.
currency when you talk to people kvetching? Because that's one of the big things that Naomi and I have a problem with out here is that when someone asks us how we are, like this is before we started recording, but you asked how I was and I said good, and then I go, fine, really. I went like that, and I'm like, I'll give you an honest answer. And our first inclination is to complain about stuff because that's how you talk with. Is that your first inclination, or has San Francisco gotten into you?
And that comes from my mom's family. Uh-huh. And it's not so much like I want to be nice, but actually like complaining is bad. We never complain.
So what's her family like? Like what is that that seems very waspy to me.
Not waspy. We're like Mexican, Spanish, and German. And most of my family's in Southern California. You know, Germans who moved to Anaheim and Mexicans who have lived here since it wasn't California.
Mm-hmm. I know that second part, but what's the Germans that moved to Anaheim? I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. Anaheim is a German word. It's like a whole German. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I took German in high school. I should have known that. I get stuck on the Anna part where I'm just like Santa Ana. There's so much Anna here in California.
Yeah, yeah.
My brain just immediately thought that it was a Spanish word without thinking it through.
I've heard, I was going to say don't quote me on this, but this is literally a podcast, so whatever.
You're allowed to be as...
The thing that I've heard is that Anaheim comes from Anna Pavlova and means Anna's home. Anna Pavlova, the ballerina.
Oh, so that's Russian.
Who's Russian. So I just forget I said anything. Anyway, they were Germans, moved to Anaheim in, I don't know, 1915 or something.
Okay. So yeah, so early 1900s migration type stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So then, was your mom given the space to be a sensitive person? Like, what allowed her the ability to be like, well, I want to play music and I'm going to follow that passion out?
I think that is less an allowance of sensitivity and more like her extreme strength as a human. She was like, she's one of 7 kids, and she was like, I'm getting out of here. I'm moving to New York. I'm doing my own thing. So I think, it was a very different situation than my growing up. It was like she was a rebel. She's like the weirdo in her family. My dad is also one of 8 kids, and he also moved to New York. Like, they have very similar stories. But
Catholic?
But I think for both of them, it was like, my mom's family was Catholic. I don't think my dad's family is Catholic. They're just large. Yeah. But I think for both of them, it was like, we are strong individuals, and we're going to do our own thing, and we're going to make a little sensitive child.
Okay. So is she playing music professionally at the point when you're born?
Yes.
Okay. So she's doing it.
She's really doing it.
Okay.
And then I think in order to take care of me, she really dialed it back. She plays music still. She does a lot of teaching. My dad is the one who kind of kept touring and doing that thing.
Do you know how she feels about that?
I think that's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I never, she makes a point of not making me feel guilty about that or like responsible.
Sure.
But I think that she would like to be performing again.
Yeah. I only asked that because I'm curious if you kind of picked up on it at all when you were a kid.
I did pick up on it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't teach.
Oh, interesting.
Partly because I just don't want to, but I think also because of a subconscious feeling that like teaching is the end of performing and touring and stuff, which it's not.
Yeah.
There are many teachers who also perform and tour, you know.
Yeah. I mean, the number of novelists that I've talked to on the show that are literature professors, or the number of jazz greats who are professors or students like that, I think outnumber the people. I mean, especially in a shitty world like we live in, where
it's a great way to have a normal income for sure.
Yeah. So no, I get it. So I was just saying that. So like, I get you're not denigrating it, but at the same time, the reason I ask these things is I'm curious about the little things, especially if you're sensitive, right? The little things you pick up on and how they kind of like nudge you in a certain direction a little bit, in a way that
Yeah.
if you hadn't picked up on it or it wasn't there, maybe you wouldn't have gone in a certain direction.
I will say that I never got the sort of classic parents telling you shouldn't be an artist thing, because both my parents are artists, and I guess sometimes that could go in the opposite direction where they're like, no, we tried this and it sucks, so don't do it. But they were both supportive. My dad was so thrilled when I went to music school, because he just moved to New York and played the bass, and now he's a professor, but at the time, like, he didn't have a sort of formal music education. He just like played with great musicians and did the thing. So he was pumped for me to go to official music school.
At what point do you think this becomes the desire to play music becomes something more than just a passing fancy?
I remember my cello teacher in high school asking me, like, is this what you want to do? And it's not like I hadn't considered it before, but that was sort of the time that I was like, yes, this is what I'm going for. I don't know. People are always asking you when you're little, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I don't think that I had been saying musician for my whole life. Like, I went through the astronaut phase and all of that normal stuff. But yeah, that moment in high school, I think, was the time of like choosing that as a career.
What was it between astronaut and I want to play music?
Well, I loved history class and English class. I'm like a big humanities person. So I think there was always something like, maybe I'll go into international relations or something like that. That was a...
Wait, did you really have a...
Yeah, really. I mean, this is high school.
Sure.
This is not like 7-year-old Lia is like, oh, international relations.
Did you like model UN and all that stuff then?
We didn't have that because I went to too small of a school. But yeah, that was the vibe.
Okay. Because I'm just curious, like, I had, at that age... I was interested in physics, and I thought I was going to be a physicist because I had this thing from my parents where I'm like, I have to do something practical.
Yeah,
I can't follow my whims, and I didn't even think because it was all about practicality. I didn't even think that my whims were something I could do. Like, it wasn't even a possibility for me. That's what I'm curious about. You have parents who are artists. You have at least one parent who was a working artist at that point, right? And so the possibility is at least there if you want it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a funny question at that point. Like, you don't know what the world is like at all. I think it'd be interesting to like have a children's book that's like all the professions, and not just include fireman and doctor, but also like, I don't know, data analyst. What do people even do?
Pipe fitter, instrument repair.
Yeah. Podcaster. Well, we didn't have that in whenever that was.
Astrophysicist, regular physicist, quantum physicist.
Yeah. I think I thought about architecture.
Uh-huh.
My grandpa's an architect, and I always loved like making maps of, possible spaces. I still think about that sometimes. I'm like, oh, I could just go to architecture school.
When you say possible spaces, do you mean buildings that don't exist? Do you mean lands that don't exist? What do you mean by possible spaces?
I mean, I loved making maps of my neighborhood. I loved designing RVs because I liked trying to fit everything into a really small space.
Uh-huh.
I loved like designing houses, like floor plans of houses.
Were they just regular houses? Do they have secret rooms? Like, what was going on?
Oh, yeah. You got to have a secret room. You got to have like an inner courtyard. You got to have, water feature, slide.
Of course.
Yeah. It's so nice when you don't think about money when you're like 11. But yeah, I don't know when that like wish to be a musician sort of became more real than like, yeah, that's what I'll do.
I mean, was it just taking material steps to do it? Or was it
I guess so. Yeah. Like my teacher asking me that was very practical. It was like, oh, are we working toward you auditioning for college? Mm-hmm. It wasn't like sort of existentially, who do you want to be when you grow up? But like, should we learn these pieces that you have to learn in 2 years?
That's really interesting because, when I talk a lot about history, I talk a lot about material circumstances that people find themselves in. And that being one of the things I'm obsessed with is the changeover in the 20th century from kind of like the old money wasps to the nouveau riche kind of like Wall Street types that happened in the 70s and the 80s. And a lot of that comes from material circumstances, just certain changes in like banking regulations and things like that, as opposed to there being like a particularly vicious, narcissistic group of people that came about. It was started with these banking regulations that made it possible to have more narcissistic lunatics. Like
or for the narcissistic lunatics to act differently in the system.
Yes, or to gain power in the system, right? That kind of stuff, right? Okay, and it started with those things, and I'm like, but when I talk about people's trajectories, it's always like, I always start to question, like, well, when did the feeling start in you? But in talking to you, it really makes me, this is maybe the first time I've really thought about it. It's like, oh, maybe it's just material circumstances that allowed you to kind of discover what you wanted, as opposed to the existential desire leading the way, like a light in the dark.
Yeah, I mean, every choice is just sort of the thing right in front of you. I wish that there was some version of thinking like way ahead and being like, all right, and maybe some people do this, but thinking way ahead and being like, all right, this is what I want to do in 10 years, and so these are the steps that I need to take to do that. But who knows how to do that?
I don't know, but I do ask that on the show a lot, and people answer me. They're like, well, I wanted to be an artist from an early age. And I'm like, did you want to be an artist? Now that I'm talking to you, I'm questioning. I'm like, did you want to be an artist from an early age? Or was it that you happened to you'd be slightly better than your peers at art, and so you got complimented for it? You liked that feeling, and so you just followed that, as opposed to you actually had the desire that led you to try to be better than your peers. It's not answerable, I don't think, but
I think that I did get like sort of special encouragement for artistic things, and even, like my mom was singing with me when I was in the womb, like that certainly helps. So I think it's a combination. I think it's like, the circumstances and the sort of like day-to-day choices that you make to make that possible. And then also, formative experiences of playing in a string quartet and being like, wow, this is a really fun way to interact with people. And then when my cello teacher asked me, like, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, that would be a nice thing to keep doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Do you think that was like the first really meaningful experience you had of playing music with other people? Outside of like your mom, I'm sure singing with her and doing other things when you were a kid.
Yeah, I think so. And that's what I wanted to do for a long time, even through college. It's like be in a string quartet. It's really fun. You should try it.
What? I mean, I've been in a band, so I know what that's like.
I mean, you know the vibe of like you're making decisions together and you're just like vibing with this other thing that you all are holding in between you. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. In comedy, we call it group mind. Is it basically the same thing where you are on the same page with a bunch of people, and so you're
Wait, like comedy, like in a writer's room or something?
Ken. It's mostly comes from improv, where you're on stage with someone. Because it's improv, you don't know what's coming next. So there has to be this kind of unspoken, there's just basic rules. Yes, and if someone says something to you, you figure out a way to accept it and then add something, and that stuff builds. If you're good at it, it builds to something that is where it's unexpected and you're all on the same page and building this unexpected thing, right?
Yeah.
Is that the same kind of thing that you're...
I mean, yes, and haha. I think that improvisation is for me, a more satisfying version of that interaction. If you're playing classical string quartets, you are all interacting with the score and making choices about that. And you have a set of instructions that you've all agreed to follow. Whereas with improv, either like comedy improv or musical improv, you're actually you have the ability to actually change the story together. And that's a really incredible experience.
When you are interpreting a score, do you talk about it and make the decisions, or is it that you're playing, like when you're practicing with a quartet, say, or is it when you're playing, someone does something and everyone's like, oh, that's cool, and then that sparks something? I mean, it doesn't have to, again, like I said, I give binaries, but
I think both, but there's definitely a lot of like close rehearsal of like, how do we want to do this 3 measures here? People, you can really get into the conversation about decisions and stuff.
Can I go back to Waldorf school for a second? Because
Yeah.
I'm curious about what the curriculum was.
Let's see if I can remember. One thing about Waldorf school is that you have the same classroom teacher for 1st through 8th grade.
Whoa.
So you have like a sort of a main teacher, and then you have specialist teachers like languages or dance or woodworking or this thing called handwork, which is like sewing and stuff like that. But the main teacher is like basically English and history and math. And I guess science, but I don't remember us doing much science. But yeah, it's like a whole philosophy. I think there's even like kind of a religion attached to it. I don't want to talk too much about that because I don't know a lot about it, but there's definitely like a whole philosophy of like how children learn and like at what point it's good to start reading but like down to very small things. One thing I remember about that education is that like everything is beautiful. You know, like we had like wooden toys that we would play with, and like there are a lot of like candles in the classroom, and each classroom was painted a specific color that like helped with growth. Or so, it's like it sounds very woo-woo, and I think that there is an element of that, but also it was very creative, and I think fostered an understanding of like the world as a beautiful place.
Does that mean like do you start composing at an earlier age? Like, do they foster that kind of like making your own art? Or
no? It's funny, like you mentioned Montessori, and I think Montessori is much more individualistic, and Waldorf school is much more like, no, we're within this form, and these are the good things to do. You know, like when we would paint, for example, we would all have the same colors, and we would all be painting the same thing, and the creativity comes in with like sort of each person's individual sunflower that they're painting, but it's not like everyone just has paints and they can do whatever they want. So it's actually quite rigid and also creative.
I'm trying to figure out, you have these kind of like international affairs, desires or whatever, I forget. You have these kinds of like, or like how concrete were these feelings? Because it seems to me, sorry, when I was thinking of Waldorf school, why I asked about it, I was like, I would think that would start pushing you in the artistic direction, but it's more that you're still in this kind of practical space almost. Not that playing music isn't practical, but I mean the world in the kind of like capitalist hellhole we live in, it is, it can be.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, how concrete these desires were. Or was it just a kind of, I guess I'll do that in the future. Let me make this question more pointed. How future oriented are you in general?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Do you mean like spiritually or like practically?
I was thinking practically, but I'm also curious about spiritually now that you bring it up.
I think that I try to be as present focused as possible spiritually, but also, like just before we were on this call, I'm like writing a grant for a project in May, and I'm writing emails for a project in November, and like there's all these plates spinning, and I am constantly thinking about the future, which is exhausting and I think not very normal.
What do you mean by like not very normal?
Normal is not the word I should use. Like not very natural to me. It's hard for me to think ahead, and it's hard for me to imagine that like a future will happen at all. And I mean that like both in the sense of like climate catastrophe, but also in the sense of like I just have a small brain, and it's hard for me to like, imagine that May 2025 will exist.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something I've had to learn to do because I'm I get gigs. And so I have to think ahead about, and also I mostly make my living by selling shows that never get made, but or films, right? But selling
so
them.
Then there's imaginary future that you're constantly thinking about.
Oh, it is so fucked up. And do you have this too? Then like, you're constantly like, oh, well, this could become a TV show. And if it does, that changes everything.
Yeah.
Right.
And if it changes. And if it doesn't, then I have to imagine the other possible future. And then you have like 12 possible futures that you're juggling in your mind. Yeah. Yeah. Are you thinking about all of those ones?
Yeah. Because you have to have like, here, look, I'll move the camera slightly a bit. Do you see the cork board there? Those are all projects in different phases. And you have to like, well, I'm writing a pitch doc, or like last night, this production company likes my writing, so they're like, hey, we have this idea. Do you want to just write up a pitch for it? So now I have to do that. Or like I'm in the middle of a script and I'm in the middle of blank. All of them could go nowhere. One of them, some of them, like you don't ever know. And so you're all like in your head at once, in my head at least, are 10 different possibilities of what could happen professionally.
And also creatively, I don't know about you, but it's difficult to be in all those creative places. Like, you know, you're writing a pitch that you just mentioned. And like, if you're also writing a TV show that's different than that pitch, then you have to like be multiple selves. So there's like multiple selves for multiple futures. It's a hard life.
Well, it's draining because you are stuck. It's very much like you're in this kind of mental sliding doors. Well, you know that movie?
Yeah.
Right? But it's like it's 12 things happening all at once in your head. And any of them could blossom into, I mean, then you have like all the other possibilities, like fucking, you know, fascists come back and then you're like, oh, what do I do?
And you try to just like not think about that possible future.
Well, it is interesting. And I don't know if you feel this. Again, I think you're younger than me. So I ask this a lot to the people who are younger than me. If the possibility of doom that I didn't have when I was younger. And yeah, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and sure, there was like the possibility of nuclear annihilation there, but didn't feel real in the same way that I think like climate catastrophe feels real.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that changes the calculus in your brain about like what's meaningful and what isn't meaningful in terms of like, does it mean for you, if you feel this, part one of the question, yes or no. Part two is, if it's yes, then do you go all in on, well, look, it's all going to fall apart. Might as well go all in on what I find meaningful. Or does it mean that you kind of like find other things meaningful and you're like, well, I should invest in family or community or something like that?
I think the thing about climate catastrophe is like, I'm already thinking about my own death a lot. Like even without that in the picture, I think like thinking about your mortality is a really good thing. Not in a morbid way, but just like, this is limited here that we have, this time that we have.
Oh, my 3 a.m. thoughts? Yeah.
But I also mean that in a joyful way. Like if that's possible, I think that it's wonderful to be like, you know, at my kitchen table eating a beautiful meal with my spouse and being like, this is not like an unlimited supply. This is like a beautiful moment that we have right now. And that's wonderful. So I think that ideally it changes my art making in a good way. I also, again, like pea brain, I don't feel like I can conceive of a catastrophic future, even though I know that it is there.
Yeah.
I don't have children, so I don't have like that horrible worry of like what's going to happen to them.
Yep. Yeah.
Not that only my children would matter. Like of course I worry about the children of my friends and my godson, and you know. But
it's different. It's different when it's
different.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons my wife and I don't have kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is like the idea of a kind of like real dystopian future is such a break with like our daily life. Like when people ask how I am, I do think, well, my life right at the moment in this, you know, I can walk outside. Everything is nice and fine. And I mean, there's like, you know, bad things outside. Like, you know, there are unhoused people on my block. Like, I'm not saying that it's not like I walk outside and everything's hunky-dory, but I'm saying like it's not, you know, cars crashing into buildings and asteroids falling from the sky and fascists marching down the street or whatever, right? Or people being snatched. It's not like it's not that kind of thing. So like my immediate life is not bad, even though I have this awareness that there are bad things and possibly multiple bad things that are converging, happening atmospherically, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's also like such a weird thing about living now is that like, not only, down the block from me, people who don't have homes, but around the world from me, there are people who are dying for a number of horrible reasons. And like, how do I hold all of that? Is it possible to hold any of that? I don't know.
I don't know, but it's part of that. It's that calculus in your head that you were talking about that made me really think. I'm like, oh, it's all of these things. What's exhausting about this particular moment, or about being an artist in this particular moment, is, you know, I wonder if you were an artist 50, 60 years ago. It was just like, well, I'm just going to make this thing. And obviously there were other things going on. I'm not saying like, 1960s. It's not like there was nothing
there was plenty going on
in the 1960s, but I'm saying that I wonder if it was a less fraught kind of like, well, I have to have 10 irons in the fire in order to do this. I have to write 10 grants, or I have to, have 10 different pitches going on with 10 different production companies all at once with the hope that one of them hits. I wonder if there was at least less exhaustion in terms of having to hold all of these quantum possibilities in your brain.
Yeah.
It's just speculation, but
I don't know. I do think that there is a huge pressure to be productive right now, or to be maybe more productive than previous times. And I wonder if some of that is like a subliminally pointing toward the end of everything, like get it all in, guys.
Yeah.
Which I would like to avoid. I would like to just do things at my own pace.
Sure.
And then die when it's done. I think that's probably healthier.
Sure. I'd rather the invitation have a 8 p.m. to question mark than to know what that time is where I have to be out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Last thing then. When you said you think about death, is that something that you've thought about since you were a kid? Mortality?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. I think I was kind of like a philosophical little kid. And again, not in a bad way. And I think it's important to acknowledge that like that didn't come from personal experience. I think a lot of people who have those feelings, it's because they had early trauma of a death in their life. And I don't have that. I think it's more of a sort of poetic rumination on death.
I mean, do you mind if I ask, like, what decade were you born in? Or if you don't mind, like, how old are you?
I was born in 89.
Okay. So, like, I mean, New York, I'm just trying to think, like, New York to San Francisco, you do have the AIDS crisis, right? There are a lot of people dying. I think, I don't know if that's something. I learned about the Holocaust at an early age.
Yeah.
And that kind of, like, affected me thinking about death from when I was a kid and being a very much orienting force in my life. I wonder if there's certain things like that are at least around you where you're kind of like picking up on it.
Yeah, I don't totally know where that came from. I think that's my whole answer. I don't know. I don't just mean like I'm only thinking about death. I was thinking about all kinds of questions about the universe. So
you were a contemplative kid.
I was a contemplative kid. Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it? I just assumed that's how you pronounce it as opposed to
contemplative. Yeah, it's contemplative.
But I just said it out loud. And I was just like, do you have that? As someone who reads a lot, there's a lot of words I don't know how to pronounce. And then I say them out loud. I'm just like, wait, that's it?
What? Oh, who was it? Oh, I thought it was Susan Sarandon for a long time.
Uh-huh.
Which I guess is not a reading thing, but...
It could be. If you've only seen her name in print.
Yeah.
If you've only been
Susan
reading...
Susan Sarandon.
Yeah, you read the novelization of Thelma and Louise as opposed to seeing the movie.
I wish I'd read that. Yeah.
Lia, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
An absolute delight talking to you.
Likewise.
Were you raised with any religion?
I was. My mom and I... Wow, what an ending question. My mom and I became Orthodox Christian when I was 12. And I'm still an Orthodox Christian. I'm a practicing Orthodox Christian.
Wait, I know. Do you mind if, can I ask? What does that mean? I don't know if you're comfortable, but what does that like spiritually mean for you?
It means a lot of things. Theologically, it's similar to Catholicism, but we don't have a pope. And practically, it means that I go to church several times a week. And it's an interesting balance for me being a far left leaning artist in a community that isn't always that. But I grew up in a California church that's very very open.
When you say Orthodox, is that like Greek Orthodox? Is that the same thing as that?
It is the same thing as that. But the Orthodox Church has a lot of sort of ethnic, not factions, but like, yeah, there is a Greek Orthodox Church and a Serbian Orthodox Church and an Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But it's all the same theologically. I grew up in a church that was a lot of Russian immigrants in San Francisco, but also a lot of like American converts. I'm not ethnically Orthodox at all.
Your mom, like when you were 12, like did she just suddenly find religion, or was it a process of like?
No, so she grew up Catholic, and I think had a lot of like meaningful, very early experiences, like pre-Vatican II, with like the Latin Church.
Yeah.
And then the Catholic Church really changed in, I want to say in the 60s.
Something
Vatican
like
II
that.
was like, yeah. And that's when like the priest turned around and he was like facing the congregation. It was a lot about like making things more accessible. And she didn't connect with that. So I think she had some meaningful experiences early on. And then when she had me, she was like, well, I don't want religion in my life, but I want it to be an option for my kid. Like she wanted me to have something. At least a possibility of that. So we kind of like would go to different churches when I was growing up. Just sometimes we would go to things. My extended family, my grandma is very, very conservative, like, yeah, evangelical Christian.
Oh, wow.
She was Catholic and then kind of like moved away from that. So that was part of my growing up too. Although it was always like sort of arm's length. My mom was always like pretty, not super interested in that. But so we went to a bunch of churches when I was growing up. And then we found this church in San Francisco and really loved it. And
Wow. Okay. I had to ask that because I'm just like, I'm getting Jewish vibes. Like it feels just like. It really,
thank you, I do.
Like just talk like.
I mean,
like,
I grew up around a lot of Jewish people, and I also feel like, weirdly enough, like the Jewish services that I've gone to feel more like Orthodox services than like when I go to a Catholic church, I'm like, I know what's happening, but the vibe is different. Whereas like Judaism is very, very old.
Yeah.
And Orthodoxy has kind of like retained some of that. Obviously, theologically, they're different, but there's like, yeah, I do feel a lot of resonance. I went to Catholic school for high school, and the only religious people in my class were me and a Jewish girl.
Weird.
Like the only people who were like practicing believers of anything were me and this other girl who was Jewish.
Was there any
So
like?
we
Did
had,
you have to go to? Did you have to like? Was there a? Did you have to
I
go
think
to
there was like a
or whatever?
mass like once a year. It was California. So it was like, we're Catholic and that means that we're like really about social justice, which is cool. That's great. But yeah, it was not a super like Catholic school experience that I think a lot of other people have had. Like we had social justice club and that's what Catholicism meant.
That's great. That's what you want out of a religion. That's the part that's like, you know, as opposed to kind of like the crazy, like, what do I want to, the mega church kind of prosperity gospel type people who are like, hey, the stuff that you're preaching isn't actually in the Bible. The thing that you're supposed to be the foundation of your faith.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Sorry. I just like, once we
No,
were
no,
talking about, by the
it's-
time we started talking about death, I was just like, this feels like we're having this feels like a very Talmudic conversation we're having.
Totally, yeah.
All right. Leah, thank you so much again for being on the show.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. I love your music.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye.